101 ways to trigger your editor. What you got,
I
Ben?
can't be like that. Where's your energy, Benjamin? Hello, everybody.
My energy?
Welcome. While Benjamin's trying to find his energy, he dropped it somewhere. Maybe the cat ate it. I'm not sure. But welcome to B Squared's Natural Capital Conversations podcast. That is actually a mouthful. Today, we hope you've been enjoying the series so far. And today, we're going to go to a different part of natural capital. And this one might be a bit controversial for some. Anyone who works for a company, just about any company, would have heard of human resources, which in more recent days, to be trendier and more user-friendly, in a lot of places, they changed their name to human capital. This seems to be the group in many big corporations that seems to control people, what they do, how they do it, how they can be trained. But we're going to break that in our usual style of trying to break down silos and do things better. We're actually going to talk about human capital today, or human resources, or whatever you want to call it, because people are definitely a form of natural capital. So
what you're saying is we're going to talk about the people that fired you a few months ago. We're going to talk about how they actually can be agents for good versus agents of complete destruction of everyone's lives.
Yes, I think we are. But in fairness, firing me may be a good thing for a lot of people. So I think it
was a good thing for them. They have far less stress in their lives. I mean, let's be clear. You needed to be fired at least once in your life. I mean, as someone who has spent his life torturing human resources, I mean,
don't be that way.
What do you mean that way?
We'll start on firings and how much time human resources have devoted to firing Benjamin over the years. Anyway,
it's been a serious amount of therapy for some people.
Yeah. Anyway, let's get back on topic. We're going to talk about people today, because people are definitely a form of natural capital, I believe. Benjamin, do you have a different belief?
I believe people are the form of natural capital in many ways. Without people, nothing else happens. The problem with people is we're complex, we're messy, we tend to have sense of humor, and some of us are even neurodivergent. So the reality is humans are probably the hardest form of natural capital to monetize and the most important one to monetize, because if you get it wrong, everything else fails.
Okay, that's fair. So let's start on talking about how do we get it right? How do we get the right people into our mining operations? How do we make sure they're the right people and keep them being as productive as possible and making the best calls possible?
So I don't know that you get the right people. I think you get the less wrong people. There's no such thing as a perfect human. Okay. If there was a perfect human, they probably are not going to be working in some mine somewhere. They're going to have, oh, come on, Ben. Look at you. We're both middle-aged white guys that have bodies that are slowly failing us. And with a bad sense of humor to boot. We are pains in the royal tushes. Pick your tush, doesn't matter. We're difficult. So right people don't exist. The people who say, oh, this is the right person, this is the right that, really run cults. The reality is the only way you actually get things to function in the long term is you have diversity, you listen to alternate points of view, you build up cultures that are actually capable of being resilient, and you fundamentally build up cultures and communities that are fundamentally tied to the communities that you operate in. Like, you can't have a bunch of people like us, look like us, talk like us, act like us, go into a country where there's none of us, and then say, oh, we're going to run things as if we're locals. I have no clue how to even make a good cup of Karak chai, for example. I love drinking one, but I'm the last person to consider myself local in the Gulf. At best, I can come in and listen, maybe come up with some answers, but I don't know really how to understand the problems. I don't think you do either. So I think first thing.
Yeah, okay, keep going.
Go.
I was going to say, let's take a step back and do the little Wayne's World time travel thing. Sorry for anyone younger than us, you won't get that joke, but at least it's not from Benjamin's favorite silly movie from the 80s or 90s. Anyway, so you're saying the neocolonial model that mining has worked on for so many years doesn't get the best people outcomes?
I'm saying the neocolonial model that mining has worked on for so many years, as evidenced by people like the former CEO of Barrick and Anglo and a whole bunch of corporate cultures, fundamentally not only doesn't get the best corporate outcomes, it doesn't get the best natural capital outcomes.
Okay.
Top down, we are right because we are born with might. It's not working particularly well in most of the world. The world's changing with the exception of one US person who's convinced that he wants to bring back the 1980s. The world's really changed a lot in the last 5 or 10 years. Look at our student body. I mean, we're 20% white men, if that, 10%,
Yeah, probably less.
probably less.
And it's fantastic. It's different
Yeah, and
perspective.
the fact, and the industry has to change. We have to change. We can't be the same. So fundamentally, one of the things that I think we're bad at is we're bad at actually creating on ramps for people into the industry. We're creating doors for people to open. We're bad at creating access because fundamentally, most of us want to work with people that look like us. And access is expensive. Access requires creating space.
Yeah,
Access is expensive. Sorry,
and look,
go for
I
it.
get that. It's gating, it's protectionism. It's what you see in the US at the moment. People are worried there isn't a place for them in the world anymore, so they try to keep anyone who's different out.
Can you blame them? Every time two companies merge, there's one CFO.
Yeah, yeah.
The other person either has to become a controller again, or they have to leave the industry.
Of the company, not the industry necessarily.
Well, I don't think we have enough CEO slots or CFO slots or senior management slots. I think we've been so busy merging these companies together that we basically have forced retirement for half of the management every time another merger happens.
It's an interesting way of looking at it. But given that one of the topics in mining ever since I've been in the industry is the scarcity of people and the struggle to get people into it, maybe we should try to keep those experienced people by giving them a different role, exposing them to something else, retraining them.
I don't think senior management is good at being retrained. I think once you get to a certain level of skill, I'm going to be polite when I use that word, a certain level of skill, you become functionally less skillful.
Can't teach an old dog new tricks.
My mom said it best. My mom said that if I wanted to teach, if I was not working half the time, there was no way I was going to be relevant 5 years in teaching business. The only way you can successfully teach business is if you actually continually do business. And she didn't say manage business. She didn't say run a business. She said do business. So we have people who have gotten so entrenched in their narrow siloed space where they are the world's expert on building out filter presses, or they're the world's expert on dealing with flotation circuits, or they're the world expert on understanding how to apply IFRS to mining, that retraining them into another silo 20 years in is almost impossible. It's not that we, I think, lack skills. We lack people who are cross-trained. We lack communities that are cross-trained with the industry. We fundamentally lack the ability to cross the silos, and that means all of our natural capital is incredibly tightly stranded into very specific roles. And in the age of AI and the age of everything changing, those roles are about to disappear. They're about to completely change.
Sorry, I'm going to put a plug in here for advice on getting fired. Ask us, especially him.
Hey, speak for yourself. I have been fired at least 10 times more than you.
Yes. But ironically, there's a lot of that going around because I've had to talk to several other people about it since I've been fired. And it's interesting. And those people will be all right, really good people. But it's coming back to the skills and the communities you brought into that. So your argument against this working your way to a top and a specialization and being the best and then losing your seat at the table is cross-train so you can pivot elsewhere, but you've got to do that early.
You don't have to do that early. You have to do that. Let's be clear. The key to being successful from a natural capital perspective with your own career and with your team's careers is have everyone capable of doing any two jobs. No one is allowed to own a seat that no one else can recreate. So take us, for example. If we're teaching and if I'm sick, there isn't a single one of the BRIM courses, with the exception of probably one of them, that you could not teach without me. Would you do as good of a job as me? No, you do it differently. In some of
I
the
do it
classes, I
very
think you do
different.
better.
Yeah.
Yeah, be completely different, but you could still do it. I
No,
could
that's
disappear tomorrow and the program would still exist.
no, and look, I think this does tie into my historic way of thinking about human capital and always having someone, at least one person on my team, that could take over the next day if I got hit with a bus, which which I think is a good thing for everybody involved. But I don't think everyone thinks that way. I think people are more protective of what they have and hold on to things rather than say, hey, you know what? I'm expendable. If I get hit by a bus, everything's going to run fine tomorrow because such and such is going to step into my shoes.
Oh, I don't think with the organizations that I'm involved in, everything will run fine tomorrow if I got hit by a bus. But I also don't have a choice.
I'd be in a
One of the
panic.
interesting, what?
I'd be panicking.
Yeah. So one of the interesting things is at some point, if you accept that you're unique or you're different, you just live with who you are and you get yourself done. I'm not saying automatically dumb yourself down to the point where you're irreplaceable. I'm saying figure out how to make sure that you're resilient systems so that things will survive.
How you can pivot, how you
Look,
can learn, how you can make yourself flexible and yeah, useful.
like we're depleting human capital all the time. Every day we're on this planet, we're depleting. You have a finite runway. At some point, you're going to die or retire or do something silly, get married again. I don't know. There's lots of ways to fundamentally shut down growth. Does that make
Yep.
sense? So at some point, things will not happen. The question is, how do you create and maximize the value of the things that are happening as they happen? I mean,
Okay. So how do we apply this? Taking a step back. This conversation. We never know where these conversations are going to go, and this one's gone down a fairly personable channel in a lot of ways. They're talking about individuals. How would let's get back to the macro. Let's get back to a mining company, and I want to talk about the community later. But let's get back to the company itself. You're running a mine or a number of mines. How do you get this resilience, this flexibility, this cross training across your people and make everything better?
first off, you admit that you have a problem. Admit that the organizations that don't grow, that don't change, got frozen a while ago. So if you look at Anglo, for example, Anglo got frozen in the 1980s. It didn't unfreeze because it reached its peak, and then no one could afford to make any mistake, as any mistake would have brought it off the top of the mountain. So to go from the world's largest mining company to a not mattering mid-tier required a complete cultural freezing of the past. So the very first thing you have to do is you have to admit, hey, we need to change. We have a problem. We need to fix something. That's your very first thing you have to do. The second thing you have to do is you then have to look at all the humans involved in the process and really figure out, where do you have alpha and where do you have beta? Who are the people that you cannot live without? And who are the people where you can fundamentally double depth them? Does that make sense? So you're going to have in any organization, the BHP executive explained this to me. He said, the reason why BHP doesn't own more than 20 assets is because we don't think we have more than 20 people who can think. And we want every asset to have one person who's super smart thinking about it all the time.
Okay.
Now, I don't know if that was a true statement, but that was basically what was the gist of what was told to me. I thought about that for a while. The reality is we spend so much time giving our smartest people all of this stuff to do that doesn't involve thinking, that doesn't involve quiet, it
Make
doesn't
work.
involve actually doing their job.
Yep. So it's in some ways it's getting those right people somewhere in the organization and then staffing them up with support. This sounds a lot like the book you were just reading.
Yeah, I think the book I was reading about buying back your time was pretty useful in this regard. I don't know that that's what major mining companies need to do necessarily. I think the first thing you need to do is figure out that A, we need to have more than one person who can manage something. B, we have to admit that our industry is in a process of rapid change. Our operational size in the next 30 years has to triple. We have to triple the size of our mines.
Yep.
And we don't have the head grade. We don't have the resources. We don't have the tailings dam technology. We don't have the social license to operate. So we basically have to go turn a 20 million ton a year copper industry into a 60 million ton a year copper industry based on the numbers that people are promoting. And we have to do that with none of the ability to actually do it. And then we wonder why we're short on humans, because people are like, well, I can go do that where I get paid like crap, or I can just go work in another industry where I'm going to be home every night, get paid much better, and have far less stress.
And I'm not going to be the responsible person for signing off on that tailings dam.
Yeah. And these are not small tailings dams. To be a responsible person signing off on a 1.4 billion ton tailings dam where you might or might not have hydrocyclones or thickeners or this or that working all the time perfectly is a bit of a trick.
Mm. Yeah, it's a leap of faith. Anyway, coming back to it. So we need some people, key people making decisions, but they need other people to support them and grow into those roles and do other things. So how do we better equip our people across the organization, from the guy who sweeps the floor at head office to the guy that sits there all night on night shift watching the process plant, to the person, the CEO in head office and what she's thinking? How do we integrate all this? How do we maximize the potential of all these people? And are we doing it well now?
So are we more like Toyota or are we more like Google? Because those are really the two solutions.
Okay. Let's map it out for everybody. Explain me Toyota, please.
So Toyota is about continuous improvement. Toyota is everyone is allowed to stop the line. Everyone's allowed to do what's needed to fundamentally continually make cars better or make a process better. To create a Toyota-style organization, you assume that you're not going to have any loon shots or any moon shots or any massive gains. You're going to be lots and lots of incremental gains, and you're going to get better piece by piece by piece. So every person that works on every Toyota line anywhere in the world has the right and ability to stop a production line to improve it, to fundamentally get it better. So you have 100,000 or 1 million or however many Toyota employees there are, all improving at the same time. Toyota is not going to win the EV race. Toyota is not going to win any short-term race. But long-term, Toyota will always be there because Toyota fundamentally makes a better car with far less quality issues, with far more simplicity. Toyota has got some real skills on running as a company. Does it make mistakes? Absolutely. Everyone does, but it makes far less mistakes. So that's door number one. Do you want to fundamentally have a continuous improvement production system where you assume that the basis of the system is reasonably good? That's door number one.
Okay.
Questions on that one?
No, let's go talk about door number two, and then I'll come back to you.
Door number two is Google. Google is mad time. Lock down 32 hours a week. Force people to be in their role for 32 hours a week, give them some Toyota quality improvement, this, that, or whatever else, and then give people 20% of their time to go do whatever they want to do as long as it's interesting. Focus on fundamental innovation on the assumption that you don't need just to fix minor stuff, but you need to break systems and completely revitalize the organization to really change everything.
You need to be
door number two. What? Disruptive as hell.
Disruptive, yes.
Yeah.
You go.
And door number two is not a bad option because you fundamentally go for massive gains. You're not trying to play for a yard here, a yard there. You're literally having 1 out of 5 downs, you're throwing it for a home run, no matter where you are in the field.
Okay. I'm not even going to start on your sport metaphors, and I'm going to assume you were trying to trigger me, not just mixing them up terribly.
On purpose. It triggered you.
Yes, but I didn't buy it.
Oh, yes, you did.
I just expressed my upset at your sports metaphors. Anyway, okay. So I will agree with you. At this stage, mining is neither Toyota or Google. My personal view, I would love just to see mining be more Toyota-like. I'm a big advocate of continuous improvement, fixing the little problems, because I think you'll get to a better place in the end. But given those two,
You're a bit
how do you set up the people for them if they're the two options? So there's really three options. There's maintain the status quo, which is we espouse a lot, but I don't think we're very progressive as an industry in a lot of ways. We can go the Toyota model and really focus on continuously improving, or we can go the loon shop model, which I think for a lot of the core mining business is a pretty tough one, just given the amount of money and risk involved in our operations.
Well, it's also a tough one because when you mess things up, people die. It's really hard to do loon shot when you're in a situation where
Yeah.
we in as high risk of an industry as we are. If Google
Yep.
messes something up, it can reboot a server. If we mess something up, someone can die pretty easily. So I'm not proposing that you can necessarily go the full Google route, but I am proposing that it's worth looking at. So no matter what you do, you cross-train people to start with. So you fundamentally go through your people, identify who you fundamentally think long-term are going to have alpha. So
Yep.
we have a board member from one of the top 10 global mining companies that sends us at our education program 5 random people a year. One of these days we have to get that company to sponsor us, but that's a side discussion. And those are people that he identifies that he thinks are going to change the overall organization.
Yep.
So he goes around the world finding us students, which is really quite entertaining, and we thank him profusely for that. That's door
Yes.
number one. Find your high alpha people, get them trained.
Okay.
Door number two, if you're going to do this stuff, is train absolutely everyone equally. Take the U.S. public school system and make the assumption that you do not have taste buds on who's going to be high alpha and who's going to be low alpha, who's going to fundamentally perform better than others, and train everyone and then see who floats to the top from that perspective.
Yep.
But either way, it involves training. It involves either training, reskilling, and it involves community involvement. It involves going out and finding people from within the communities, finding people who sit on both sides of the fence, finding people not just from traditional mining schools. You've got to actually bring in a lot of outside people, or else we don't stand a chance.
And I like that, especially the community, because as we know, mines are where the ore body is, and they turn up. There's a lot of money there. There's a lot of wealth to be generated by that operation, and usually the local community, wherever that is, pays the price. So it does make sense to try to involve them in the process and give them some additional benefit out of the process, making it better for everybody.
But let's come back to the natural capital. Let's come back to what we're fundamentally talking about. We have a limited amount of human capital in our operations.
Yep.
We have a limited amount of social capital with the communities we work with. And we have a massively limited amount of social capital with the global world. How we spend all of that energy is make or break for us. And right now, as an industry, I just don't think we do a good job.
Okay. So how would you propose doing this differently? Well, before we get there, how do you measure this? How do you measure the human capital? One thing we've always been big on, if we're talking about water, if we're talking about energy, if we're talking about tailings dam, is there's got to be a metric around it. And if we start focusing on that metric, usually in the form of a ratio, we'll start driving ourselves towards better performance, the Toyota model, if you will. What are the metrics? Or is there just one metric around human capital, or is there one for internal human capital versus community human capital?
So are we talking about operations, or are we talking about metric across the overall organization? Because operations are pretty easy to come up with metrics for.
Okay.
Once you get beyond
Give me
operations.
operations. Let's start with the easiest building block.
So separate your people into two groups: high alpha, high performing metallurgists, people who you fundamentally are limited, scarce, and are essential. And then humanity as a whole, truck drivers, everyone that is crucial, where if you don't have them, don't have an operation, but you could probably find another person that can recreate that role.
Okay.
Create those two baskets.
Yep.
Then look at the number of each of those baskets needed per ton of ore at the operation.
Okay. Yep.
So figure out where, if you have high alpha people, look at every process, every decision on how many high alpha people do you need for that piece of equipment. So one of the reasons why I don't like ore sorters versus a flotation tank is, Ben, if I want to put an ore sorter on a mine site, how many metallurgists do I need per ore sorter?
Probably one.
Okay. How many metallurgists do I need for 100,000 tons a day of flotation cells?
Probably one.
Okay. How many tons does that ore sorter run?
Last time I looked at it, not that many. Maybe 50, 100 at a stretch. I don't think it's even that high.
Tons an hour.
Tons per hour, yes.
Yeah. So maximum 8,000 tons a day if everything goes well. The very largest with all the economies of scale.
Yep.
So you're telling me I need 25 more metallurgists, 8 to 25 more metallurgists, depending on how you do the math, for ore sorters versus flotation cells.
And I do appreciate it mightn't be metallurgist. It might be someone highly technically skilled to be able to deal with that machine. But yes.
Pump maintenance people, whatever, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So the key is figure out if you have scarcity of high intelligence people, don't have them do things that are not material.
Yep.
Figure out what matters and have them do it.
Okay.
So I'll give you my example. I want to teach. One of my goals is to ramp my teaching to the point where I'm teaching 10,000 people a year.
Okay.
Currently, we teach about 500. So I want to get 20 times larger in how I teach. The other option is just go out and find 20 other people to teach. But why not try to maximize the value of the teaching I'm doing?
Yeah.
It's just not hard. I mean, it is hard. Getting to 10,000 people with live teaching is kind of insane since I don't want to do it full time. So that means I have to get used to what?
But still, like the analogy you gave on operations versus teaching, you're still measuring the inputs in those, which is unusual for you. You were talking about tons of ore treated, and you were talking about people taught, not necessarily people learning or graduating.
So here's the fundamental reason why you measure the inputs versus the outputs. It's deeply personal, and KPIs around personal stuff have to be connected to something where you have some output on doing it.
Okay.
So I do not have so around personal natural capital or around human natural capital. KPIs have to be driven around things that the people who are the natural capital can control.
Okay, so you're not going to bring the metric back to the amount of metal produced or another metric of
I
that
don't know. I don't think that we have that level of skill around humans to pull that off. You could just easily say tons of copper produced per ore sorter versus tons of copper produced per rough flotation tank. You could do that, but the moment you do that, it gets even worse. The first order metric is still so much better than no metric.
No, I get that, but how does a very quantifiable person like a CEO then justify this training and grooming, if you will, of these outstanding people, or all people for that matter? Because there's a dollar value attached to it. There's a cost attached to it.
Agreed. So if you look at raw rock value per ton of ore and multiply it by 8,000, if you have $50 raw rock value, that person is going to be generating 8,000 times.
Okay. So
you make it $100. So you suddenly have that person generate $800,000 of revenue. If they have a 100,000 ton operation and they're still have $100 raw rock value, then they've got a $10 million of revenue. You're not going to necessarily get the second derivative, which is profit. The problem with human capital is you have to get to first derivatives to manage it, or else you're not going to make it work. You're not going to successfully get to the second derivative because we don't have that level of nuance. So I think that if you purely looked at revenue per person or versus profit per person, you're going to get 80% of the way there. In an optimal world, I would argue that big consulting firms and other things look at profit per person. But we're 20 years behind human resources for McKinsey. Okay, McKinsey's taken such an extreme of alpha versus beta versus this versus that versus everything else. Let's just go back to the basic thing. Humans are high value, low value. How do we maximize the amount of revenue that they give us? That's it. If we just start there, we're going to get a long way there. If you need the nuance, which I'm okay to do, you're no longer trying to optimize the human capital. You're optimizing the CFO's view on human capital. And that's not going to change the human capital. It changes how the street views you.
Interesting. There is a lot to unpack there. And we barely touched on communities. But we can save that for another day, because I think we've probably shattered some people's minds and given them a lot to think about. I hope it was interesting for you, this discussion. It certainly was for me, and it'll take me a few days to unpack it and go back and fight with him some more. If you agree with us, let us know. If you don't agree with us, let us know also. And if you have a better solution, we are happy to hear it and happy to have the discussion. Once again, if there's more topics you'd like us to cover in these podcasts and you find them interesting, shoot us a note on LinkedIn or another method, and we'll see what we can do. Benjamin,
and next time,
definitely fun and challenging.
Thank you for listening. I'm having fun debating these things. Next time, we're going to talk about tailings. We're going to talk about the value and cost of tailings and how we optimize and maximize their value and use, because tailings are key. Without the right to dispose of tails, 99% of our mining, outside of iron ore, 99% of our mining industry would not function, because almost nothing we do is direct ship.
And just before we go, I love that caveat. And that's often a lot of discussions around mining, I think, miss those nuances. You said all mining, and then you said, outside of iron ore, because most commodities are very different in how they operate and their impact. And I think I think a lot of times we get big consultants who throw them all in the one bucket. And we've seen that before. We've seen certain numbers produced talking about transportation being one of the largest energy costs, which it is for, say, iron ore, but it ain't for something like copper, especially complex copper, where comminution takes over. So very important point to remember.
Nuance is the key. If you don't have nuance, nothing works, whether it be by human capital or tailings or iron ore. Hey, we should talk about the carbon footprint of iron ore and why Australia is going to lose. That will be a fun post.
Okay. On that note, we will see you next time. Thank you for listening.
Bye.